He came to claim an empty shack, met a silent girl with a knife, and stayed for her trust. Jeremiah Cole felt the sun punch straight through his hat brim long before he saw the shack. Adobe walls slouched like a tired mule. The single window gaped, glass long gone. The deed in his pocket claimed it belonged to him now, a gift from a dead uncle who never wrote and rarely remembered names. He pushed the warped door. Hinges groaned. A rusted objection. Then spine-chill silence. Inside, dust hung thick as gauze. Broken chair. Tin cup on the hearth, rim chipped. Heat lay over everything like a held breath. Movement flicked in the far corner. A girl unfolded from shadow, young, dark-skinned, hair plaited tight against the skull. Left hand braced on the dirt floor, right hand brandishing a hunting knife too large for her wrist. Eyes fixed on him, no plea, no panic, only calculation, like a bobcat cuffed in a snare, deciding if teeth are worth the risk. Jem lifted both palms. Empty. A drip of sweat slid from his temple, traced dust across his jaw. The girl's knife didn't waver. Light slipped through the cracked roof, smearing amber across her cheek. The line of dried blood down her forearm caught it, turning rust to fire for one heartbeat. He stepped sideways, slow toward the hearth, found the dented kettle, poured the last swallow of canteen water inside, and set it on fading coals. Gesture, nothing more. Steam rose, scented faintly of iron and wood smoke memory. Minutes stretched, brittle. She lowered the blade only enough to rest its tip on the packed earth floor. Jem took that as permission to breathe. He rummaged his saddlebags, laid a square of hard bread and 2 pinches of salt on the crate between them. Then back to the doorway, dropped his bedroll, and sat on the threshold, half outside, half captive. She watched as if every blink cost her ground. At length she edged forward, lifted the bread, sniffed, tore it in half. A crumb fell. Her gaze tracked him even while chewing. Animal trust measured grain by grain. Sun fell hard beyond the ridge. Shadows claimed the room. Jem unfurled his coat across his lap, leaned against the jamb. Sand hissed through chinks. Behind him the mule snorted once, settled. The girl eased to sitting, spine against the wall, knife across thighs. Between them the crate and the faint warmth of cooling steam. They did not speak. In the hush he heard 2 heartbeats, a staccato of wary life inside walls meant for ghosts. And Jem recognized a truth he hadn't felt since childhood. Sometimes inheriting nothing is how a man is handed everything he still needs to earn. Morning cracked open on a sky the color of scorched tin. Jem's mule stamped impatient circles, shaking flies from a tail matted with dust. Inside the shack, the girl still sat upright, knife across her knees, eyes following every slant of light like a sentry guarding a border, no map marked. He poured a palm of coarse salt into a wax paper twist, laid it on the crate beside a stub of candle. Then he pointed to the barrel at the door, where rainwater had settled dark and still. A single nod. Offer made, not order. She rose slow, favoring her left ankle, crossed to the barrel, filled the rusted cup one careful dip at a time. Steam of sleep still clung to her skin. Now water dappled it, turning dust to dark streaks. She drank, wiped her mouth with the back of her wrist. Same motion he'd used on long rides when words felt heavier than thirst. Jem stepped outside. He gathered tumbleweed, hauled dead wood from a collapsed goat pen, stacked it under the window for fuel. When he returned, she was kneeling, scraping embers together, coaxing them to new flame. Bread crust toasted on a bent horseshoe stub. The air smelled of iron and survival. They ate without table or talk. He left half his portion on the crate. She finished hers, but she did not touch his. Instead, she pushed the extra back toward him. Boundary kept, dignity intact. By midday heat, Jem shoveled sand away from the eastern wall, exposing the adobe footing cracked through like an old bone. The girl, Amara, he decided to name her in his thoughts, for steadfast, emerged from the shade, set down a bucket of creek mud she'd fetched without explaining how she knew the water's direction. She knelt, patched the fissure with sure palms. Mud hissed where it met the wall, then stilled. Their shadows stretched long across the yard before either broke the rhythm. Jem lifted spare boards onto the roof, hammer striking rusted nails flat. Below, she gathered fallen straw, stuffed it beneath new slats, insulation against night wind. Sweat striped both faces, dust glued skin to cloth. They worked as two parts of one silent engine, tension turning gradually to cadence. Late light fell amber on the doorway. She lugged a dented pail inside, water sloshing. He followed, wiped his palms on his coat, then paused. Her knife lay on the cracked table. Within his reach, blade turned inward. Trust or exhaustion. Either way, a hinge shifted. He cleaned his hands in the basin. She bound her ankle with ripped cotton, not neat. From his saddlebag, he produced a tin of salve gone stiff with years. Offered it. She studied the tin, unscrewed the lid, sniffed. Camphor and pine. She spread a smear over torn skin, the first wince he'd seen break her mask. Darkness settled swift. He lit the candle stump. It threw one weak halo. Through the open door, the desert breathed oven heat. Coyotes barked miles away. Inside, two breaths learned each other. Without a word, he dragged his bedroll to the far corner, unrolled it near the threshold. She gathered her blanket, returned to her post against the wall. But this time, knife rested on the floorboards, her hand an inch away instead of wrapped tight. Wind woke him near midnight, sand hissing across stucco. In the flicker of coals, he saw her silhouette at the window, shoulders tense, listening. A distant rider? The mule stomped once, then stilled. She looked back, question in the tilt of her chin. He shook his head. No threat. She exhaled, the sound softer than the storm. Before dawn, he brewed chicory, scent filling the single room with bitter hope. He poured one tin cup, set it on the crate. She accepted, sipping short, cautious pulls, eyes warming by degrees. When she finished, she wiped rim with thumb, placed the cup on his side of the crate. An invitation returned. The sun rose blood red. Jem hitched the mule, headed toward the trading post for flour. At the threshold, he paused. You stay, he rasped, the first words to leave his mouth in months. Hoarse, but clear. She watched him a long beat, then nodded once. Knife left on the table beside the empty cup. He rode out, feeling the weight of her nod like a stone in his pocket. 10 miles of dust later, when he realized he was humming under his breath, a tune without name, he understood. The shack was no longer empty, and neither was he. The sky carried slate on its shoulders all afternoon. Clouds stacked like freight wagons, rimmed in sickly green. Jem felt the change in his teeth first, a dull buzzing, then in the mule, skittish, rolling whites. By the time he reached the rise above the shack, wind already bowed the creosote brush flat. Amara stood outside, blanket pinned around her shoulders, braids whipped loose. She pointed to the eastern eve. Last night's makeshift slats had slipped, leaving a black mouth open to the sky. One good gust would peel the roof like tin on a stove. They moved without talk. He handed her a coil of baling wire. She fetched 2 broken fence pickets sharpened to wedges. Thunder cracked, dust lifted, twirling into ghosts that scattered past the doorway. Inside, candle flame guttered sideways. Jem climbed the rickety table, shoulders brushing rafters. Amara braced the legs with her weight, palms steady despite wind shaking the walls. He drove wedges under the loose board. She twisted wire through holes he'd drilled at dawn, knotting ends with sure fingers. Rain hit, first a hiss, then a roar. Water sheeted off the new ridge, but leaks opened elsewhere. Drops spattered onto the dirt floor, pocking it like quicksilver. Amara dragged the bedrolls to the dry corner, then knelt by the wall trunk. From inside, she lifted 2 torn grain sacks, needle, and a twist of faded thread. She sat cross-legged, head bowed to the dim light, stitching holes faster than wind could widen them. Lightning flared through the window. For an instant, Jem saw the scar at her ankle, the half-healed scrape on her forearm, the concentration knitting her brow. He realized the knife still lay on the table, untouched. A gust slammed the door wide. Rain slashed across the threshold. He leaped down, slammed it shut, dropped the crossbar. A crack split somewhere above, then a small, steady drip. Another breach. Amara rose, pointed, west corner. They rolled the trunk beneath the spot, draped patch sacks across the lid, angled them so water tunneled harmless to the floor instead of onto the bedrolls. Hours passed measured by thunder. Each time wind found a weakness, they answered with wood, wire, or cloth. Two strangers soldering a shelter around themselves. Near midnight, the storm's pulse slowed. Rain softened to a whisper on settling dust. Jem slumped against the wall, lungs burning from ladder work. Amara doused the candle, let violet afterflashes fade. In the hush, he heard the roof boards creak, not in pain, but in relief, like ribs releasing a held breath. She crossed to the hearth, hooked the kettle from coals, poured steaming water into the tin mugs, dropped a shard of dried mesquite blossom into his cup, a hint of sweetness rare as coin. He sipped. Smoke and honey lingered on his tongue. She sat opposite, mug cupped in both hands. Rain tapped slower. Wind wandered off. He cleared his throat, the sound foreign. "Thank you," he said. Two words scraped raw but honest. She lifted her gaze, surprise flickering before settling into something gentler. Her lips shaped a reply he couldn't read. Then she touched two fingers to her chest, then to the patched roof overhead. Gratitude shared. They rolled blankets out side by side for warmth. Between them, the knife, wrapped now in burlap, lay as neutral as a spoon. Water dripped into the trunk lid at steady intervals, a clock counting space without malice. Jem closed his eyes. Instead of flames and screams, he dreamed of stitched canvas holding against storm, of a roof newly sure, of a girl's hands braiding wire through wood until hurt became shelter. Dawn found the shack smelling of wet adobe and mesquite tea. Sunlight leaked through a dozen seams, but no fresh raindrops followed. Amara stood at the doorframe, watching steam rise from the desert, hair haloed in backlight. He joined her. Outside, stormwash carved bright paths through dust, revealing flecks of quartz that glittered like scattered seeds. She pointed to the highest ridge where clouds broke, light pouring. He nodded, hope stitched into horizon. As he turned back in, her voice, quiet, first time, bore one English syllable. Stay. Not question, only confirmation of what storm and silence had already sown. He answered with a smile rough as the land, but true. In the doorway hung two patched grain sacks now drying in sun, proof that torn things mended together, late light bled rust across the desert when hoofbeats shivered the horizon. Jem and Amara stood side by side in the onion plot, hands dirt-stained, shoulders loosening after a day's work. The sound snapped them tight again. 3 riders, maybe 4, pushing heat off their horses, dust flags rising behind. Amara's jaw tightened. Jem felt it more than saw. She was already counting exits. Without a word, he tapped her wrist, inside, and strode for the shack. They barred the door. Breath hovered between them, hot and quick. Jem lifted the plank trap he'd cut weeks before, revealing a crawl space dug into the packed floor. Water jars, seed sacks, a hiding place waiting for need. She slid down, knife in hand, eyes on him until he eased the plank back, scattering straw to mask the seam. Hoofbeats stopped outside. Spurs clinked. A fist rapped the door. Too hard to be neighborly. Jem opened. 2 men filled the frame, coats wine-whipped, rifles across saddles behind them. One wore a deputy's tin star, polished bright. The other carried a poster rolled tight. "Evening," Star said, gaze sliding over Jem's patched roof, the single mug cooling on the crate. "We're tracking a runaway piece of property, Apache girl, young." He unfurled the poster, sketched loose, but the braids and rigid shoulders were Amara. Jem shrugged. Barris lift. "No girl here, just a shack in the wind." Star's partner circled the mule, eyes narrowing at fresh onion beds, quilts airing on the line. "Your place looks busier than one man can keep," he muttered. Star stepped inside uninvited, boots scraping. Lamplight gilded dust swirls. He scanned the narrow room. Bedroll, tin plates, salve tin on the shelf. "Travel alone?" Jem's fingers brushed the Spencer, leaning by the door. "Alone suits me," he said, voice low as shovel steel. Boards creaked overhead. Wind or memory. Star paused at the crate, lifted the spare mug, sniffed its rim. Mesquite sweetness lingered. "Funny taste for a man by himself," he mused. Outside, partner called. "Tracks heading east, bare feet small." Star's smile thinned. "You sure she ain't in here, friend? We got $50 saying she is." Jem's heart hammered, but words came steady. "You got dust in your eyes, that's all." Star's gaze fixed on the floor seam. He nudged it with boot toe. Board held. Wind slammed the door against Star's back. Candle flames stretched, then steadied, throwing his shadow tall. He exhaled, annoyed. "Storm's coming again. We'll ride the wash, circle back at dawn." He tipped hat with mock courtesy. "Think on that reward." They mounted, hooves fading into dusk. Jem counted to 50 before lifting the plank. Amara emerged, hair dust matted, knife tight in fist. She looked at him. Question, fear, gratitude melted to one raw spark. He poured water into her cupped hands. She drank, eyes not leaving his. He set the rifle on the crate. "Barrel up." "Dawn," he rasped. She nodded once. Understood the plan without syllables. They worked by candle stub. He packed sacks of meal and onions. She wrapped quilts, filled canteens. Before first light, they slipped from the shack, mule hitched to a sled of firewood as decoy. They followed the dry arroyo south, moon guiding them between black mesas. At sunrise, the riders returned to find an empty hut, embers cold, footprints tangled with mule drag heading north. They followed the wrong trail. By then, Jem and Amara had crossed a narrow cleft to a hidden spring. His uncle's map had marked only with a circle. Cottonwoods whispered over clear water. They tethered the mule, rolled quilts under a wide bough, and listened as the desert swallowed hoof echoes behind them. Jem exhaled, the longest breath of his life, watching sunlight splinter through new leaves. Amara unstrapped her knife, held it hilt first to him. A trust tendered. He wrapped his fingers over hers, pushed the blade back. "It stays with you," he whispered. She understood, slipped the knife beneath her blanket, then touched her palm to his chest. Heartbeat drumming strong against her skin. Storms and riders would return, but just then, in cottonwood shade, the day felt wide enough for living. And somewhere east, the shack stood empty yet mended, waiting for their footprints to find it again. Two paths returning when trust no longer needed hiding places. Cottonwood stood silent guard while night cooled the spring. Jem and Amara rested beneath the largest trunk, blankets pulled high, mule cropping new grass. Though pursuit never reached them, neither spoke of turning back. First, they would make the shack truly theirs, not a place to hide, but to breathe. 2 dawns later they returned, arriving just as sunrise lit the patched roof gold. Dust of riders had long blown east. Only hoof prints of their mule cut the yard. Jem led Amar to a bare circle of dirt beyond the onion rows. "Uncle's ledger marked water under here," he said, voice scraping unused tones. They dug by hand at first, spade, pick, scraped nails. By midday, clay turned damp. Amara knelt, pressed ear to earth, listened. Her smile, thin as a crescent, told him to keep striking. At shoulder depth, the shovel blade shattered a thin crust. Water pooled fast, cool and clear. They lined the well with stacked stone, each piece shared palm to palm. Amara cut willow boughs for a tripod. Jem lashed them with rawhide. He lowered a battered pail. She hauled it up, poured first draw over their joined hands. Baptism of new ground. Second pail they drank, eyes locked above the rim, water tracing dust from their lips. Inside, she swept storm grit from corners, pinned the quilt as curtain across the window. Colored blocks threw shards of light across packed earth. Jem fetched an iron nail, drove it into the wall beside the door. Amara approached, knife in hand, blade wrapped to dull. She placed the hilt on the nail, weapon turned decor, past turned lesson. Jem hung the shack's only key beside it, steel and iron side by side. Protection shared. They cooked onion stew with a pinch of mesquite blossom, ate from the same pot. When they finished, Amara traced letters in leftover broth on the wooden lid. Home. Jem added a rough spiral around the word. Journey still turning. Seasons shifted. Corn tasseled tall, quilt faded softer in the sun. Each dusk they sat on the step, two mugs steaming chicory. Sometimes Amara spoke in low melodies, snatches of a language older than barbed wire. Jem answered with hums, then with words one by one, until sentences fit his mouth again. One cool night she pressed a bead of turquoise into his palm. Belonged to my mother, she whispered, the first confession. He threaded it onto the rawhide from her knife, tied it around her wrist once more, but looser now. Rain came gentle, filling the well to the brim. They floated the turquoise bead on its mirror surface, watched ripples wobble stars, then fetched it back. Hope tested, hope returned. When summer reached its height, travelers occasionally rode the road but passed with nods. No one asked about the girl in the patched dress drawing water, nor the man beside her laughing rough and bright. Desert had decided the shack was no longer empty. One evening, Amara placed 2 bundles on the crate, seeds saved from their best corn, wrapped in quilt scraps. Next spring, she said. Jem closed her fingers over one bundle, kept the other. Future split, shared equally. Under cottonwood shade, mule dozed, onions cured, and the well reflected a sky so clean it hurt to stare. They lay on the warm earth, shoulders touching, listening to water lap the stones. Heartbeat of a life they'd built from salt, storm, and a single moment of staying. When darkness settled, quilt colors glowed in lamplight like coals. Knife and key chimed softly in the draft, equal weights on the wall, and the shack, once bequeathed as nothing, breathed like a chest newly freed. Its silence now filled with 2 voices unafraid to speak. If this tale of quiet trust warmed you, hit subscribe, leave a like, and share in the comments which moment, the storm-bound stitching, the stand at dusk, or the first cold water from the well, moved you most. Your words keep these desert stories alive.